Hi everyone, I'm Leanne Nunn. I want to start today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, the Yugambeh people where you are and the Awabakal people where I am. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are listening today. The Yugambeh people and the Awabakal people and other Indigenous communities lived on this land for thousands of years in essentially egalitarian relationships. Clearly, there is a lot we need to learn from our Indigenous elders. The presentation today will describe the earliest warning signs of intimate partner abuse research project, the focus of which is on listening to the voices of survivors. Just a couple of details to start with. I'll be using the term intimate partner abuse and not domestic violence because I don't want to reinforce the idea that domestic violence is about physical violence, and I think the term is misleading because of that. I also believe that these relationships can occur, abuse can occur in relationships after the relationships have ended, as well as outside of the home. So I think domestic isn't the right term either. So intimate partner abuse is the term I'll be using. As well as that, the focus of this research project is on women survivors of abusive heterosexual relationships. I do know that abuse occurs in same-sex relationships and to men, but given that most survivors of intimate partner abuse are women from heterosexual relationships, that's the focus of the research project. This presentation is an intersection of three different perspectives. I'm a psychologist, so I've been a psychologist for more than 20 years. I've worked across clinical as well as management, training, research types of areas. And I've also worked in community, hospital and private practice settings, so a big broad width of experience. Most of my work has been with survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence. I'm also a researcher. I'm studying at the University of Tasmania, and I'm doing a research master's there at the moment. And I'm a survivor of both family violence and partner abuse. I think it's quite a challenge for clinicians to talk about being survivors as well, and acknowledge their status in that area. And I hope that by doing that myself, that I go some way into making that easier for others. To outline just what we're covering today, the first thing is why the focus on the earliest warning signs, the aim of the project, the actions to date, the literature review, and the findings from that, the methodology, the timeline, and the interview findings. The first thing is why the focus on the earliest warning signs, and the first reason for that is the process of indoctrination. Evan Stark describes this process that goes on in abusive relationships. He says coercive controllers, and coercive control being one of the main components of intimate partner abuse. So he says coercive controllers regulate a woman's behaviour, including isolating them from sources of support, taking their money, depriving them of such necessities as food or medicine, suppressing conflict and resistance, closing off opportunities for escape, communication or transportation, and laying down and enforcing rules for everyday conduct. And interestingly, when Evan Stark said this in his book, he was comparing this process to what occurs for prisoners of war and hostages. This process is so well known and well utilised that people who are enforcing things like prisoners of wars and holding hostages use the same processes to control the people, to indoctrinate the people that they're holding. It's a strategic approach and well known in terms of controlling others. Stephen Hassan, who wrote a book about combating cult mind control and has done a lot of research in that area. He was actually in a cult himself previously. He writes that they, and he's referring to members of cults, come to live within a narrow corridor of fear, guilt, and shame. Problems are always their fault, the result of their weak faith, their lack of understanding, their bad ancestors, evil spirits, and so forth. They perpetually feel guilty for not meeting standards. They, again, members, are thoroughly indoctrinated with the belief that if they ever do leave, terrible consequences will befall them, their family, and/or humanity. They are locked in a psychological prison. And that description of being in a cult is identical or very similar to the types of experiences for women living in intimate partner abuse. This is a clearly defined indoctrination process that goes on in a broad range of other areas where the aim is to control others. And it's a very powerful process. The process diminishes, if you stay in it for an extended period of time, it diminishes all internal and external resources and makes escape almost impossible. We can see that in cults all the time. Can see that when people are held hostage. The control, the power and control of one person over the other is strategic and well understood. And it's the same process that occurs for women living with intimate partner abuse. The second reason why I'm focusing on the earliest warning signs is that warning signs are really subtle. I'm going to use an example from my own life here. In 1995, I was in my car at a set of lights with a man I'd been seeing for just a short period of time. And we were in a relationship together, but early days of the relationship. We were stuck at the set of lights. We were talking, and I could tell that he was a little uncomfortable with what we were talking about, but I didn't really know why or what was happening. It wasn't a serious conversation. And then all of a sudden, he just got out of the car and walked off. He left his things in the car, his keys and things like that, and just got out of the car, closed the door and walked off. Now I was stuck behind other cars and at a set of lights, so I couldn't move anywhere. I couldn't do anything about it. I just had to sit there. And my reaction was panic. I was worried about him. I didn't know what was going on. I was confused. And so once the lights went green, I was able to keep going. I drove around looking for him, trying to go where he would have gone, searching for him. I was worried about his welfare. How was he going to get home? What did I do or say to upset him? How did this happen? You know, what was he thinking? I was not thinking about what was going on for me, how disrespectful he'd been to me, or how inappropriate it was for him to treat me this way. Now, this was one of many, because there were many repeats of similar experiences. One early warning sign that I missed. I didn't see it. Now, I wonder if you could just reflect on yourself honestly and see if you could. And there's a lot of reasons why I couldn't. There's a lot of other justifications I can give you for why I didn't see that. But regardless of those, I just couldn't connect the pieces together. I couldn't step back from it and look at it objectively. Too many positives were happening in the relationship. And in my mind, they seemed to outweigh what the problems were. Couldn't put emphasis on these things. I did have a reaction that felt like this isn't right. But I wasn't able to make that a priority and pay attention to it. I can say that he did eventually get home on his own, and I didn't find him when I was looking. But I wonder if I had recognized that pattern at that time and been able to act on it, if I'd seen that there was these pattern of events occurring that were a warning sign, that were telling me a story, and if I'd known how to act on that, I would not have spent the next 15 years of my life in the drama of intimate partner abuse. This is a quote from Jenny Willoughby. She's a partner abuse survivor. She was interviewed on CNN in 2018. Her partner, I think his name was Rob Porter, worked for the White House, ex-partner he was, And when they were doing security checks on him, they found that he had a history of partner abuse crimes or incidents that had come up with the police. And so she was getting interviewed on CNN to talk about what it was like to live with him. I like using quotes from Jenny Willoughby because obviously with him working in the White House, they were people with some status, some financial credibility behind them. They had, some reputation and connections and things like that. So it's not that typical image that we have of people who live with partner abuse. So it was a low-grade, constant terror of not knowing what I might do to set something off, what mood he would have. There weren't any explicit threats, but I frequently felt threatened. And that's a question I'm asked a lot, is why did you stay if he was a quote-unquote monster? And the reality is he's not a monster. He is an intelligent, kind, chivalrous, caring professional man, and he is deeply troubled and angry and violent. I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. I think this is the challenge with looking at the earliest warning signs, is it is so hard to pull out the bits that are abuse. These people are not abusive in everything they do, and certainly not in their presentation to others. So when you're trying to ask others, is that something I should be worried about? Frequently the people around you are saying, no, he's fabulous. So it's really hard to pick these earliest warning signs. Besides the fact that they're very subtle, you also are having to pull out these bits out of what otherwise seems like a very kind and loving, professional, charming person. So my question in there is, how do you see the monster hiding in plain sight? And it is so hard to see that we've really got to focus on these earliest warning signs to give women a fair chance. The third reason for focusing on the earliest warning signs is that empowering women is not victim blaming. I'll start covering this issue by talking about the similarity between childhood sexual assault grooming and intimate partner abuse grooming, which is, I guess, another term for those earliest warning signs, that grooming process that goes on in either of these relationships that leads to the perpetrator escalating their abuse in some way. Now, I'm not alone in thinking that there is a connection between these two. Lundy Bancroft, who has done a lot of work in the area of both of these issues and has linked the two processes well. He says that perpetrators of intimate partner abuse are known for being charming, kind, and attentive during the first months or even years that a couple is together. An incest perpetrator may lay the groundwork for years as well. He works to build a special relationship with the intended victim and strives to gradually break down her or his boundaries with slowly escalating invasiveness. In both cases, the victim is often quite attached to the abuser because of the manipulation and the many positive seeming periods in the abuser's behaviour. To extend on this quote, I want to give you an example from my own life. So my son was 8 years old when he came home feeling sad because of the video he'd seen at school. There was a young girl in the video who was made to drop her towel for her uncle, and my son was very upset at watching it. They were trying to teach the kids how to recognise the warning signs of grooming. My son and I talked at length about this as a result, and due to my background working in childhood sexual assault, it was a conversation we were used to having, and we just needed to process it some more. So the outcome was okay for my son. But what's not clear to me is why he was in a third grade. So most 8-year-olds, most third graders are being taught about the grooming of childhood sexual assault, and no one mentions victim blaming. In fact, we recognise how essential it is to be training children in what to look for. I know, working in the field of sexual assault, that we can't protect children from perpetrators What we can do is teach them to speak up, to recognise that it's wrong, and to tell someone so that they can get help. We know that this process is so subtle that the only chance we've got is of training third graders how to do it. People in year 3, what are they seeing? What do they do? Who do they speak to if they need to? Don't say it's victim blaming. We say it's informing. We say it's keeping them safe. And yet the perpetrators may be in their own home. The perpetrators are likely to be people they know and trust, not some stranger. So I'm not sure how that's different. I can't understand why that's a different view that we have of that to the idea of giving women the information about the earliest warning signs of partner abuse. And the fourth reason for focusing on the earliest warning signs is that we are failing. I know you guys already know most of these statistics, but I'll repeat some key ones. 1 in 4 women since the age of 15 in Australia have experienced physical and/or emotional abuse from their partner or a previous partner. At least 1 woman in Australia every 9 days is murdered by her partner or a previous partner. And almost 10 women a day are hospitalised for assault injuries perpetrated by a spouse or domestic partner in Australia. And the one that I haven't got up there that I found most damning for me was when the World Health Organization, I think it was in 2017, said that a woman globally is more likely to be murdered by her current or previous partner than by any other means. They're shocking statistics. And the progress we've made is that the statistics have remained stable. I suppose at least they haven't got worse over the last 10 years. And the national plan to reduce violence against women and their children has been in place during that time for the last decade. And with only 2 years left before that plan is supposed to have come to its conclusion, we've had no recorded reduction in prevalence. And I just don't think we can wait any longer. I think we've got to start looking at primary prevention activities to try and change women's exposure to this abuse. I know that there is a gender basis to how intimate partner abuse works. I know that the aim of changing gender and of improving gender equity is a really good one and will make a significant difference. I just don't know that we have the time to wait for that to happen. The aim of this project is to explore women survivors' understanding of the earliest warning signs of intimate partner abuse. The purpose of that is to assist in reducing exposure. The research question says to explore how women survivors retrospectively describe the earliest warning signs of a pattern of abuse in their intimate relationships. The actions that we've taken to date, I've completed a literature review. I got ethics approval from the University of Tasmania Social Sciences Human Research Ethics Committee, which took a while. I've made some connections with some organisations and other stakeholders who can help both by supporting the project, but also by finding us participants to be interviewed. I've completed 3 interviews so far of the 15 to 20 that need to be completed. And that's been a bit delayed by the ethics approval, but also because of COVID. So we'll be moving forward with that. And I've done some initial data analysis of those first interviews. The literature review was completed from November to December 2019. Parallel searches of 4 databases as well as manual searching was undertaken for the years 2000 to 2019. Now, the key findings, firstly, Murphy and Smith did, and some other researchers have done similar work, did a process of coming up with a list of what they saw as early warning signs of intimate partner abuse. And they listed those out. Murphy and Smith have 23 of them. And they gave those to some groups of adolescents and asked them both to look at that list of of early warning signs and identify if they thought that they were inappropriate or abusive actions, and then to say what they would do as a result or how they interpreted them. So interestingly, many of the adolescents could recognize those behaviors as not appropriate, but they often interpreted them as being playfulness, or so they saw, jealousy as a sign of love, for example, playfulness or indications of love. So they misinterpreted the warning signs, didn't see them as serious as they really are. So other researchers like Lang, Keeling and Fisher, Short et al., McCosker and McKenzie have interviewed women, and they've asked them about the same kind of time frame at that early stage of the relationship. What were the potentially earliest warning signs? And what they found was when women were being interviewed, they were able to, explore this context that was there. So there wasn't simply individual behaviours that made them go, that's an alarm bell, but there was a context or a pattern or a constellation of these behaviours that together were a warning sign. So the outcome of that, so the findings from that is there's the intimate partner abuse or the warning signs of intimate partner abuse is not just a simple list of behaviours, and we need to hear their descriptions from the language of survivors themselves. The next part that was really significant in terms of the findings from the literature review, and this was from Monckton, Smith, Walker and Stark, who did a lot of work on the progressive nature of intimate partner abuse, is that entrapment is critical. So what happens is over time, if you're exposed to the behaviours, the abusive behaviours for an extended period of time and increasing intensity, you become entrapped. It becomes harder and harder for you to find those internal and external resources to escape. And so having an alarm before that entrapment occurs is essential to women being able to get out of the relationships before the impact of them is more severe. The methodology. So this is a qualitative study with single semi-structured interviews with 15 to 20 women who were over the age of 25. Over the age of 25 because we're trying to get people who've been in more mature relationships rather than adolescents. And so they might have some of that, escalating abusive behaviour to assist in looking back and seeing the earliest warning signs. Purposive sampling is being used, so we're accessing survivors through third parties most of the time, where they're able to help us find people who've already had experience sharing their story for training, advocacy, or development, program development purposes. So that minimises the risk to them of telling their story for this research project. It's a phenomenological or narrative design to really help retain the richness and the depth of the stories that we're being told. The ethical considerations were quite intense, relating to the consent process, decreasing risk by allowing women to, get out of the process at any point along the line, following up with a check-in to see that they've coped okay with the interview. Ensuring anonymity was key, as well as trying to increase the benefits to participants by using a trauma-informed care approach to the interviews, and hoping that they go away with some benefits from participating. The data analysis and management process, it's a thematic analysis looking for consistent themes across the interviews, and we'll be using grounded theory to find a framework, develop a framework, or find a framework that aligns with the findings. The timeline is as laid out there. Obviously, there's a number of steps still to happen, with the goal of the thesis being submitted by the 2nd of September 2021 and the interviews being completed by the 15th of January 2021. So in terms of the interviews, so this is based on, this project is an extension of the Keeling and Fisher project that was completed in 2012, where they did interviews with 15 women in a refuge. They interviewed them all and were looking for those consistent themes. One important part was they found that context was critical to the recognition of any warning signs of that transition. They looked at this transition from when a relationship goes from love to being abusive. They found 3 themes. The first was the princess effect, where women felt, that they were treated really special, that the perpetrator was really charming, and this made them feel like there was hope for something in the future, that things were going to continue to improve. There was also another theme around feeling vulnerable, where many of the women went into the relationship with some level of vulnerability, and they shared a lot of these vulnerabilities with the perpetrator, not realizing that that might be used against them down the track. The third theme that came out was commitment, that perpetrators frequently wanted a strong and significant commitment really quickly in the relationship, often encouraging them to move away from their usual surroundings, or socially distance, or some kind of financial or emotional commitment that they were always wanting. So building on Keeling and Fisher's research, there are some points of difference here with this project. The first and most important being that Keeling and Fisher interviewed women in a refuge. I'll be interviewing women, or have been interviewing women, 6 months, at least 6 months after the relationship has ended. So that, to me, what I've found in my clinical work is that women who have recently got out of their abusive relationship are really struggling to identify the relationship as abusive, to see all the types of things that were going on in the relationship more objectively, and to step back from it and really explore it in an effective way. So to me, making sure that there's been at least 6 months since they got out of the relationship really gives them that ability to reflect more effectively. And also, Keeling and Fisher were focused on coercive control, whereas I'm looking at intimate partner abuse more broadly. The interim findings from the 3 interviews I've done, firstly, is just to reinforce this idea that you cannot remove the individual behaviours from the context or the pattern that is occurring, that on their own, in isolation, the behaviours just get minimised and not focused on, because they're only one portion. So we've got to look at that whole broader context and link the behaviours together to see that pattern. That a vulnerability or need is manipulated, but that could be a promise of something more, like, that there's opportunities coming down the track, whether those opportunities be that you're wanting a family and this person's offering that, or it might be that there's business opportunities, or financial opportunities that you think are coming, but there's it's often this promise of something else because you're feeling a bit vulnerable about a particular area, and that's kind of manipulated to make you feel like I need to stay here. And the strengths that a woman has that she values the most in herself are frequently undermined. It can range from feeling beautiful to, being a good cook or a good mother. Whatever that strength is that woman values in themselves, that seems to be the really clear target and is the first area to be attacked in those earliest times in the relationship. I wanted to finish the presentation by using some of survivors' own words, because the focus of this project is on using survivors' words and bringing their words out to share for all of us to understand better. So this is by AF. The first time he yelled at me, I cried, and he yelled more, telling me not to cry. The next time he yelled abuse at me, I didn't cry. I just kept myself together and kept quiet. And he said, see, you were getting better at handling this already. It was like he was teaching me to live with his abuse. I knew this was odd, but I didn't let myself focus on it. In relation to violence against inanimate objects, this is from McCosker et al. And her interviews. The way I felt and had trouble dealing with is that even though I am not on the receiving end of the breakage, that it is directed at me and that I am at fault. I'm not being the perfect wife. Therefore, he is having this terrible anger. And then finally, they make you feel as if you're to blame. I know I used to do it. I'd say, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you, but I hadn't done anything. And it's this rebellion and this twisting. And I think that's a really important part of this process, is this inner twisting that women do in these earlier stages. Spotting that thing that feels a bit strange, odd, in this example, or, you know, for me, I could see there was something strange happening, but then pushing that down, both by his great behavior, but also by our own kind of longing to see something better. I think if we can work out how to address that, you know, we really have a chance to get women to address this earlier in their relationships or to leave the relationships. This is my list of references that I've used throughout the presentation today. I'm sure that'll be on the slides that you'll get access to later. And these are my contact details. So as I said, my name's Leanne Nunn. I previously was Leanne Donahue-Tamplin. If you need to send me any questions or any issues, or you want to be involved in the project, please do so. Be happy to hear from you. Right, thank you very much, and I'll leave it open for questions.